Hello, welcome to another tonalist landscape oil painting demonstration. This is your painter in residence, M. Francis McCarthy, and the painting I am bringing you today is a study after Camille Corot. I don't know the title of his piece. It's just called Landscape. As a matter of fact, I think I might have done a study of this before as a 5x7. And there's a lot of similarity between Corot's, and he was super prolific and he lived a long time. So it can be quite challenging to find titles for his works. The reference that I had was really, really tiny, and I used a program called Gigapixel to enlarge it. That's made by Topaz. If you don't know about it, it's pretty handy for enlarging low resolution images. It will create artifacts, especially the larger you go. But if it's a real clean image, the artifacts are extremely minimal. You know, it's kind of the more information it gets, the better the result, of course. But even with very low information, it's better than just upsampling in Photoshop. So, highly recommend that program. It's not really cheap, but a Topaz Gigapixel. Check it out. Anyway, yeah, so I had this panel. It was gray, and I thought, well, you know, Corot does this silver gray thing. It's the first time I've done a Corot over gray, and I have to say it worked out just fine. And gray is not a bad color to have as a ground. It totally has its purposes, especially, I think, in this instance, you know, if I've seen Corots in real life. You know, I haven't seen that many Inesses, and I've seen zero John Francis Murphys, but I have seen Corots in real life, and they're very silvery. Yeah. So I had the gray panel around, spending a bit of time on the drawing, as you can see. Actually, the whole thing took a while. And then the finish, things got a little maybe tighter than I would have liked, but I had to bring it to a finish, so what can you do? You know, I'm always warning you about popping that thing on the easel again, but in this case you'll see the brightest whites and the birches and other things had to be brought up, and all in all I think it's a successful study, and you know, a saleable little painting. When I do sell studies after the masters, I always have full attribution on the back, and even more so in the gallery and what have you. I always make sure to call it out to people that it's a study after a master, and this is actually one of the real reasons to do studies after the masters instead of, say, living dudes like myself. When you tell your clients or customers that it's a study after a master, that gets you a certain amount of respect for doing what is in essence a copy. Yeah, right. And the thing is with doing studies. Oh, by the way, before I get much further, I do have a really excellent book on Corot. Excellent mostly because the reproductions in it are really nice. Yeah. But I've got a little bit to read about Corot, and that'll be coming up as soon as I'm done burbling. But you know, the practice of doing studies is really a great way to get much better, especially if you have your favorite artist. And I always have the caveat of don't just I don't know what the heck that was. Don't just do studies after only one artist. Make sure you kind of spread it around and do a lot of different people. Yeah. It doesn't have to be an amazing amount. Maybe at least 3 guys, you know. Anyway, this is Corot study from me, probably number 30, 40, something like that. I absolutely adore him, and it's been quite a while. The studies of the masters are some of the more popular things in the channels, and I suspect that's because, you know, people really want to try and get their head around what these guys did. I believe that Corot was working on a brown under like a brown tinted ground or canvas. Not so much gray as I've done here, or even like the toneless would veer into more burnt sienna type tones. It's actually one of the really quickest ways to get a toneless effect is do your painting over, say, a burnt sienna or a reddish color. When you work over the browns like I do now, it's definitely it definitely gives things a bit of an older look. And interestingly, as I pointed out in the Solo Pigment series, uh, painting, or as I found out when doing my researches for that series, painting on brown was an innovation of the Renaissance. Prior to that, people were painting on white, and everything was tight, man. When you've got a colored ground, it gives you a lot more freedom and a lot more liberty to you have little bits of that peeking through here and there, and it's not really a problem, right? It just looks fine. In fact, oftentimes if you get real close, I can get extremely close on my paintings because I take very high resolution photos of them usually before I sell them. And you can see all the patches of the ground peeking through. It looks fine. It all comes together, And the thing is, like, if you were to get real involved, like I say you are working on white or something like that, you get real involved with covering all those little patches, everything gets really tight. And let's face it, extreme tightness is definitely a sign of amateur painting. The looser, the better. And although I have to say, it's also true that extreme looseness is a sign of amateur painting. It's just a little further along the progression. You kind of like have a sense like, oh, this is too tight. I should really loosen up. But you don't know how to loosen up, and you don't know what to leave out. But it's all good. You just keep pecking away at it. Take those bad paintings, sand them down a little, put a coat of something else on them, and then do another painting right over the top. And the museums of the future will absolutely love that. They'll think that's a great thing. Anyway, let's read a little bit from our book. Now, this book I highly recommend you get. It's very reasonably priced. I got my copy on vacation while I was in France. It's just called Corot. The author's name is Cecil Cecile Amen, Amen. There is an English version. Mine is a French version, but the very interesting thing about this book is each page has it's not even each page. When you open it up, it starts on English on the far left and progresses through French, German, Spanish, I don't know this other language, Italian. I can't even recognize this last language. Maybe it's Swiss or something. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But the greatest thing about this book is that the reproductions are really, really beautiful. And Corot's reproductions often, I remember, and I have a lot of Corot books, and they always look real flat and kind of sepia-ish, and not in a good way. They're missing the snap that's really present in real life. But this book does an amazing job of getting those across. I highly recommend buying it. It's very reasonably priced, hardbound book. You won't regret it if you're a fan of Corot. So that said, I'm on page 126, reading, of course, the English section. The Journey into the Daydream. With increasing age, Corot consolidated his way of working. He now painted what he saw, but above all, what he felt. In the last 15 years of his life, these feelings were almost exclusively memories. The resulting paintings were sometimes based on an open-air sketch. They're listing paintings here that you can't see. The compositions are very bright and flooded with light. The artist now put accents on forms and colors, and finally neglected the details. When he painted outdoors, he maintained a great distance from his motif in order to better grasp the totality of the composition. Quote, I am never in a hurry to arrive at the details, unquote. First and foremost, I am interested in the large masses and the general character of a picture. Well, that would have been the same quote. Sorry, I had to turn the page because the way this book is broke up, the English, goes to each successive page. Presumably under the influence of the progressing landscape photography and first prints in brown, gray, and green tones, The colors in Corot's paintings became increasingly reduced. He often confined himself to a color tone, to which he added only small colored accents, and that's definitely true. The palette on this painting, this study I did, is so limited, really. Here a red cap, here a few white flowers, etc. In order to meet the great demand of dealers and collectors, he began painting entire series of landscapes in 1859. Between 1855 and 1874, he exhibited about 30 works, all of which had the word souvenir in their title. Corot's late paintings invite us to, above all, to dream. His beguiling works have the human being in the lap of pure nature as a motif, or show imaginary landscapes populated by individual figures. The last works were strongly influenced by theater, poetry, or music, art forms he loved very much. He opened past to dreamed nature, as critics write, only to conclude shortly afterwards, he is not a landscape painter, he is the poet of the landscape itself. Good stuff. Yeah, I won't spend your time looking through this book, and I'd have to find, I guess we're into a giant swatch of color plates here, so that's, oh, and then there's a figurative section, and his figurative work is quite good too. I wouldn't say he's the genius with the figurative stuff that he is with the landscape, but certainly solid work, and it probably informed and advised his landscape painting. And you know, the thing is, he's one of these early guys that made landscape painting a thing. You know, the only one prior to him, or I think actually maybe a contemporary of his, would have been Constable. I suspect Constable came just a little bit before Corot, and but Corot is a massive inventor of the modern landscape picture, and not to be underestimated. His importance is not to be underestimated. And you know, you can spot a Corot a mile away, and his approach to composition and the way he was able to get air and light into his trees. That's the thing. Now, the technique that I exercised here was a little different from his. I was doing like a little side swipey brush thing. In fact, through this whole painting, you'll see me doing these diagonal strokes over and over, and then kind of adjusting and smoothing them out, all the way from the drawing stage up through the successive stages. And this went through 3 passes, so I did the complete drawing, that dried, and that was back in December. Then I did my first color pass, and that was around the 27th of December. And then finally I put a finish on it just a couple days ago. So what you can see me doing now is that final finish. And one of the things I did was made my reference a little bit darker, because I was lacking some of the darker contrasts that I felt were necessary. The other thing I did was kind of bump up, well, I didn't have to do it with the reference, but when I increased the darkness in Photoshop, it actually bumped up the saturation as well. And so I started working in a few more earthy greens on top of the muted greens. And I should point out that one of the ways I arrived at the muted greens was to start with a base of my Mike's green color, which is Hansa yellow medium mixed with black. And I can adjust that very readily into all sorts of different spaces. What I would do to get a Corot green was bring in some gray, which would be ivory black and white, my mixture, it's always on my palette of Mike's gray. And then I might tilt it with a little bit of phthalo, and then I would finish off with some raw umber or burnt umber, depending on where I wanted it to go. That'll give you Corot green right off the bat. Yeah, that gray. Now, say you were to start with the phthalo or whatever, you'd have a much harder trip getting it into a natural feeling sort of color. So that's one of the reasons that I always use that Mike's green as a base. And I'm happy to pass that tip along to you here at the 14-minute mark, because you made it all the way through the video. Thank you so much. Anyway, if you enjoy my work, you enjoy my videos, you can pop on over to my site and give me a donation or buy a painting. That'd be cool. You can also, the live version of this is in the members area. It's about 3 hours long, and it's, you know, you're there, you're a fly on the wall, you're in the studio. Anyway, until I show up with another video, please do me a favor. Take good care of yourself and all your loved ones. And stay out of trouble.